Alright, so I actually started recording another video. I need to go and delete that actually, so I'll start doing that while I talk here. When we last left our heroes, they had discovered information that there was a conspiracy to form a new confederacy aboard the Phasean Lascelles. This information came at the hands of one of the top-notch spies who had been infiltrating Telvanni, and through them was also infiltrating Redoran. He had tilted his hand by attempting to set an ambush for Alexander, the Lugian, in an attempt to prevent him from saving the northern shore from the navy fleet that was going through there. This, of course, failed. Where's the frickin' folder? There it is. Our heroes decided they should get a good night's sleep, and I, of course, agreed with them for various obvious reasons. There it is. During which I asked Fiona Seal's player how Fiona Seal was doing, because if you've been keeping track, this is actually the first time she's had a time to sit down and rest since she was asleep way back in the garden, the portal hub, which was a little over a day and a half ago at this point. So she has been run ragged physically, mentally, and emotionally by everything that she's just encountered, and she is just barely holding on. And she really gets some genuine anger, some genuine fury in her about this gentleman, this Vilkas guy, because she believes he is responsible for at least some of the problems that she's had to deal with over the last couple days. They examined their options. Now, most of today's session was actually spent planning and strategizing, which doesn't bother me. I actually rather enjoy it when I present a puzzle in the form of, do this, and they plan it out in advance. I like to call that the Metal Gear Solid mentality, for reasons that are hard to explain, because it's not actually what you do in Metal Gear Solid. You don't actually say, okay, I need to go into this route and go in here, blah, blah, blah. But imagine if you planned it all out in advance and then adapted as you went. That's kind of what we're going with here. They decided that their best option would be to travel by horseback through the southern pass around the mountains through Telvanni territory. They were going to pause basically once they hit the Lelu border and rest for a little bit, and then they were going to advance. Now, as they were going, they started talking back and forth about their plans for how they were going to deal with this. Both of them decided that it would be best to hit Vilkas when he was at his caravan rather than when he was at his house. They figured that would be a better overall policy, a better procedure, a better way of doing it. As they were going, Flux revealed to his sister that he now had the ability to shapeshift on a minor level. In relative terms, this means he can take any other equivalent humanoid shape of his own. For example, he could look like a human here, or he could add the ears to look like an elf, or he could shape himself down to look like a dwarf, that kind of a thing. He is still quite limited in his abilities, and he doesn't gain actually bonuses such as the light vision or anything like that, but he can change his shape from that kind of perspective. And anything like scan or true seeing or anything of that sort would not see through it, because they would see him as a dwarf, even if he isn't acting like one. All they'd see is a very strange dwarf, you follow me? So he revealed this to her, and they both decided to go ahead and disguise themselves before they go on the journey. She got a heavy robe with a hood thing and padded it up to make herself look like she was a male, masculine, and he decided to dress himself up as a dwarven female, and was that. So the two of them were talking as they go, and he decided that he wants to weave a trap for them. Now the idea he comes across here is he wants to make these pebbles, and there was actually quite a bit of tossing back and forth about ideas. I haven't talked about weaving in great detail as far as the player usage yet, but basically, if you can think about it and your character has a good reason to have this kind of concept in mind, I will probably allow it depending on the skill roll. So what he decided is he wanted these pebbles that he could activate manually that would basically give off a paralyzing field that could trap whatever was in it. So he could spread these pebbles on the road and then activate them whenever the caravan, Vilkas's caravan was over it, and be like, ah, and trap them like that. Now he did quite well on his roll, so it only cost him a single crafting exp in order to do so. And he managed to make another little item, which I was using a pen like this to demonstrate, which is just the activator, which is what he's actually going to use to do it. Now the activator can be used 3 times a day, and he can use this for any other items in the future that he uses to make, with the intent of being tuned to this activator. So this is something he can use in the future, even if the pebbles ended up being one shot. But moving on. So when they camp, he goes ahead and weaves these pebbles, makes them, gives them the enchantments, all that sort of thing. They decide to keep going for a bit because at this point in time, it is about It is just about the time at which the sun is setting, so they keep pushing a little bit further into Leilu territory, fully disguised at this point, still rushing, and they get to the major road, one of the two major roads that they believe this caravan will be on. Now, I already rolled this in advance. If the first road they would pick, the easternmost one, was the road Vilkas would be traveling on, so they did pick the right road. He, Flux set up basically waited until there was relatively low traffic, and that took until late in the night because this is, for those of you who understand the term, this is a gold road or a king's road. In other words, this is one of the main conduits for the entire western half of the island. So even at night, there are still people going through here, and still people with guards and things like that in order to prevent, animals or harpies from attacking and whatnot. So he waits until there's no one visible in any direction, goes ahead, spreads out the pebbles, and goes and basically gets himself set up in the trees, nice and hidden, and uses his shapeshifting ability to camouflage himself as another tree trunk, and waits out the night. Firnasil goes this way, several hundred feet, and settles down for the night. They both get a decent amount of rest. They wake up and basically just kind of start keeping watch. Now, Flux was the one on point, so he did really well on his spot check. He successfully caught a caravan that looked different from the others, just a little bit. The only way he caught this was because he rolled so well. It is entirely possible he would have missed this completely, because it wasn't a well-armed... It looked like... Okay, let me take a step back. If you could picture, this is a whole caravan, several wagons, several people moving with it and going down the road, okay? This is quite a big space. As this is moving along, the next nearest caravan is like right here. What I'm saying here is that in the morning, especially when this period of time is happening, there's quite a bit of traffic to the point where there's only a few dozen feet separating the first caravan of the second. This is extremely highly trafficked. And the caravan, the specific one, was only just barely discernible from the rest. The only way he caught it was because he noticed that several of the people who were dressed as merchants, who were, looked like regular old travelers by and whatnot, actually were in fact looking around as if they were guards. And several of the guards were in fact, they looked like they weren't actually guards. You get where I'm going with it here. The whole thing was very well disguised, and he barely caught it. But he decided that was it, and so he just went ahead and set off his trap, which caught a decent portion of the caravan, the front chunk of it, and stopped them dead. Stopped the horses too, so all the wagons came to a halt. And he then hopped down and immediately decided to go full tilt. He activated all of his abilities, including morphing into his elemental earth form. So he's got elemental earth. This giant earth elemental looking guy with a massive axe and a massive tower shield, which is also made of steel, which can also attack at ranged even with a melee swing. Comes striding down and basically starts laying waste to the guys who are left. Now, he goes out of his way to not kill any of them. He was constantly doing subdual damage, which was more difficult, but he was pulling it off successfully. After only about a round of this, people in the back started screaming, seeing this giant monster attack the caravans, what looked like just another merchant caravan. And the caravan immediately behind was basically... if you know this, you know that a caravan that is moving can't just stop on a dime like that. Obviously this one did magically, but the one behind them was basically on a full-on collision course, and Flux was trying very hard to make sure there were no casualties, so he spent several rounds basically getting people out of the way while knocking them out because they were attacking him, and stuff like that. As an addendum, one of the guards attacked him with a device he'd never seen before. After looking at it, it became clear it was a type of bow and arrow, but it was mounted on a stock, and the bolt was much smaller. And obviously I'm describing a crossbow, but he'd never encountered a crossbow before. This was technology that was passed beyond what they had on this island. And so he saw this guy using a crossbow, which is obviously a weapon of some sort on him, and I just felt like mentioning that because it was an interesting plot point. Next thing that happened is there was a scuffle within the center wagon, and two people came tumbling out, and they were on the other side, so they couldn't quite see. One of them looked like a guy who was just a merchant, just a plain old guy who was running for the hills. He's just like, oh my god. The other one was someone who looked like a pauper, someone who was dressed, very poorly in rags, dirty hair, dirty face, leapt up on the top of the wagon and said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" or something like that, "How dare you?" Something along those lines, right? I don't remember the specific wording. At this point in time, Firnasil had gotten closer in range and was using some of her psionic abilities to help. One of the things she did was she sent out a telepathic message to everyone involved, basically saying, "Be calm, we will not harm you." Flux knocked out the guy on top, thinking, "Aha, we got him," because of the way he was acting and the fact that he was clearly magically disguised. He succeeded on his save to disbelieve the illusion, but he couldn't actually see through the illusion to whoever it was because it was an enchantment in his robe. So Flux, having knocked out everyone and everyone else is either paralyzed or whatever for the next several minutes, goes and starts doing healing checks, applying healing in order to several people. He finds one of the guys that had his legs broken by the accident, because the caravan behind them did actually hit. All this happens over the course of just a few minutes, so you forgive me if I'm kind of talking quickly. I'm trying to squeeze a lot of information into this space here because a lot was happening. Um, Flux then started going through the wagons one by one, searching them. In the very back one he found several merchants. In the middle one he found nothing. In the front he found several kegs of beer, one of which he broke as he was trying to get in. And then Flux took one of the kegs of beer back to the back one and put it in. And was like, "Sorry about this." um, Now he also successfully managed a nice diplomacy role because people were starting to approach him, other guards from the caravans behind, and just people who were wondering what's going on. And he basically was like, nothing to worry about here, nothing to worry about. He succeeded on his role. Nothing's a problem. We have this under control. It's just been an accident. Well, everyone be calm, that kind of thing. And after all this was done, he went ahead and pulled the robe off of the guy who looked like a beggar and found out that it was not Vilkas, as he assumed. While this was happening, Fiona got it in her head to go after the guy who was running. Now, you watching this is probably very obvious, but believe it or not, neither of my players actually picked up on the fact that this was actually Vilkas. I'll go ahead and rewind a bit to give you a bit of information onto what happened. See, there were a few hints I gave, but what happened is as soon as Vilkas is not stupid. As soon as the caravan was stopped and everything came to a dead halt, he knew what was happening was some kind of magical attack because physically that's not really feasible. Very first thing he did was turn to one of his merchants, gave him his robe, which made him look like the pauper. That was the illusionary robe. Gave him a lot of his equipment, all of it actually, 100% of it, except for a single drawstring bag, a little leather bag. And he gave him like 20 gold and said, "Here, I want you to demand to know what's going on with these people and insist that they respond to be defiant, be brave. I'm going to go." And then he went and ran. So the obvious assumption for the players was that the guy who was not behaving like he should was Vilkas, right? Well, Fiona is a Scion, Psion, so she used several abilities whose names I don't recall because I don't know psionic abilities that well, but basically she put down a massive area of darkness. It's not magical darkness, it basically removed the light from a massive cubicle area over here. So they couldn't see what he was doing, but neither could he. Now she went up there, gave herself the ability to get to see in low light, and raised it up by just enough so that she could then see into it and figure out what was going. She was surprised to see that he was in fact still going. He was going much slower and feeling in front of him because he couldn't see it all. But he wasn't. He hadn't stopped. He was also holding that bag I mentioned in his arm, in his hand, very very tightly. She walked up to him and basically was trying to be amusing and tapped him on the shoulder and was like, "Pooh." And he wasn't even phased. He was like, "You will not stop me from my divine mission." And he was completely unafraid as he's moving forward. Until finally she dismissed it, hit him with an ability that hurt like hell, did 15 damage, which to a non-PC character is quite a bit, as you know, and basically put him down. At this point in time, Flux had finished all the stuff he was doing back there, which was happening at the same time, by the way. Ran up, managed to get up here, and did several healing checks to stabilize him. And then they realize, he looks at her, and she looks at him, and they're like, "Okay, we need to make a choice right now. Do we go back and play crowd control, or damage control, or do we run?" And she said, "Let's run." So he literally picked Vilkas up, put him over his shoulder, fireman style, and they ran, abandoning the pebbles, I might add, but just leaving the scene of chaos behind them. They run for a full half hour westwards, into closer to the coast, further into Hlelu territory. They finally get to a point where they're far away from just about everything, and they put Vilkas down, and they make sure he's still unconscious, and they're like, "Okay, what do we do?" And they debated quite a few options at this point. The net result was they decided they were going to go ahead and rest here. Then they wanted to interrogate him with torture or otherwise, something. They wanted to get more information out of this guy. And then they were going to go ahead and kill him. Now, I want to stress the emotions at this point were running very high amongst these characters. Fiona especially just wanted to gut the guy. She was so pissed off at this individual for everything that is happening, and all her anger was focused on this face that was in front of her. Even illusioned, she knew this was Vilkas, and so she went ahead and tried to get some sleep so she could regain all her power. She spent every single one of her psionic points in the previous encounter, all of them, 100%. So she went ahead and rested for the night. And at this point in time, actually, I should say it's about 1 in the afternoon. Yeah, that's about right. So she goes ahead and tries to get some sleep, gets some leaves over her face or whatever. Flux spends his time trying to, pretty much spends the entire time analyzing that leather bag I mentioned. He manages to get it away from Vilkas. He was gripping it so hard that it was actually difficult for him to pull, even though he was unconscious, if you follow me. After several successful rolls and several appraise checks and weaving checks and whatnot, what he determined was that this thing was of artifact level power. Arguably the strongest thing Flux has ever seen in his life. That all the advanced technology and magic that he had seen within the sanctuary paled compared to this. That massive scanner device, which was a thing of sheer genius, nothing compared to this. Whatever made this was immensely, ridiculously powerful. Now, he tried to open it. That, of course, didn't work. I just told the guy playing, I was like, no, whatever you want to try, it will not work. That bag is not opening. He's like, okay. And he tried a few other things, a few other checks, a few other tests, and finally got the total amount of information he got out of it was directly tied to Vilkas's soul, and it was some kind of portal. There was some kind of transportation device involved. Now, after about 7 hours of that rest, Flux was on watch and heard incoming people, and at the edge of his range, he could tell what he was hearing was search parties, people who had started to roam out that far, had successfully made it, and were fanning out in his direction. And so he woke up Fearnesil very quietly, and they decided to run south this time. And what happened was several hours of them running south, carrying Vilkas on their back, and then they went east in order to try and get back towards friendly territory. After quite a bit of traveling, they were debating what to do next, and at one point Fearnesil literally just said, can we just kill him now? Can we just kill him now and get over with? And Flux was like, well, I want to learn something from him first. I want to figure out what's going on. And so they decide, okay, fine. They stopped in the middle of this field here, and they plopped him down, and they woke him up. Now, what happened was me playing Vilkas and them actually playing themselves, and us actually role-playing a full conversation back and forth, which I can't really emulate here that well, so forgive me for just giving you a narrative summary. Basically, he wasn't afraid. He showed no signs of fear whatsoever. He was actually he found the whole situation rather comical. And he looked at the bag and said, that's not going to do you guys any good. I'm the only one who can open it. And Flux is like, yeah, I know. And after some discussion, he asks them, what are you here for? Are you politicians? Are you assassins? Are you just people from the mainland? To which Flux had a wonderful response. What the heck is a mainland? Which I thought was really awesome. And finally, but I mentioned that because that little point is actually important, that he does know that the mainland exists, which is exceedingly rare. He then basically starts to try to bargain with them. His terms are very simple. He wants his life and that bag back. And Flux, this kind of was retconned, but Flux was basically offering him the option of, well, this wasn't retconned, I guess. Flux basically, okay, Vilkas offers them gold, lots and lots of gold, more gold than they could possibly imagine, okay? They say no for some reason. He says, okay, well, I can offer you, if there is nothing on this island I cannot offer you. And he said this with total sincerity. They kept being like, do I need a deception roll? No, he's being honest. Okay. And so Flux finally said, all right. And his terms were Vilkas had to go back, tell the truth to every single one of his personal followers in the conspiracy, admit that the bag was his source of revenue and where everything had come from, tell them all the things that I'll mention here in a second, tell all the Hlelu people that, the lies and propaganda that have been pushing were all lies, and tell them the truth about Redoran and Telvanni, basically to set the whole thing straight. Now, I want to stress this. If Vilkas was being given his life and the bag, he was actually willing to do that. He was actually willing to abandon everything that he had worked for 12 years, I finally put a number on it, in order to save his life and get that bag back. He was willing to toss it all away. They decided no deal. Probably a good idea, actually. But he was willing to. He was willing to, in good faith, make that decision. Now, at one point in time, Flux was doing the majority of the interrogating, but at one point in time, Fearnesil looked at him and asked, What the heck, man? And he detailed some of his background, just a little bit. He told them about how he had literally been a beggar on the street when an individual approached him. Except he can't call it an individual. The way I described it was as though a robed man approached, but there was no muscle, nor sinew, nor bone. There was just presence. There was just power within the robe. And the robe, which was a deep jet black, approached me and gave unto me this gift of that bag, and said, "Be subtle." And those are the only words he imparted unto me, but I did not know what he meant at the time. And so he reveals that he found out that the bag, he could open it up, and there was what is effectively an infinite supply of gold in there. Now, let me make this clear. The gold standard on this island is actually rather low compared to the mainland, for obvious reasons. A few thousand gold is an absolutely insane amount of money. The kind of gold this guy has already thrown around is actually more money than the island has produced. For that kind of circumstance, he could do a great deal with infinite money, if you follow me. Even if it wasn't actually infinite, even if it was only a few million, he could still use that to great effect. He reveals that he then dragged his way up to governorship within an extremely short period of time, 3 months, which is nothing short of astonishing. And I mention that to highlight both how powerful the gold made him, relatively speaking, and also to stress the fact again that this guy is not stupid. And once he became governor, he became frustrated, irritated, because even though he had power, he realized he actually had none. He did not have the ability to do whatever he wanted because he genuinely believed with his whole heart that those in power should be able to do whatever they choose, and those who do not have power should just kind of live with it, right? And that was his genuine belief. And so he began this whole conspiracy, this whole confederacy thing, in order to change the nature of the entire island, in order to better suit what he believed it should be, because he believed that was what be subtle meant, that the robed creature had given him. Now, she starts asking him about the robe, and he details it in great detail, and Fiona Sealed kind of turns to Flux and says, "You've seen one of those before." Now, the guy playing Flux actually forgot about that incident, but as we both reminded him, Flux has in fact seen a creature just like that before. Earlier, when he was examining the wound, when he was basically astrally projecting with one of the scanners in the second sanctuary. So they both thought that was interesting, and after considerable more talking, they reached the point where Fiona Seal decided she was going to go ahead and use her mental abilities that she had in order to try and force him to open the bag open so they could figure out what was in it. And they opened the bag, and sure enough, there is this massive extra-dimensional space in there, huge, stadium size, right? And it's obvious that something had been in there. It's worn down, and it's weighted, and there's scratches everywhere, right? I mention this because there's only a very small handful of gold in there, only a couple hundred gold pieces, if that much. And when Vilkas looks in there and sees how empty it is, he is utterly shocked. He starts ignoring them completely. Up until this point, he hasn't been fazed by anything they do. He is completely unafraid and completely nonplussed by anything they've been saying or doing. He is completely unafraid. Mind you, he's bound this whole time, just to get the point across. But he looks into that bag and he sees there's only a few gold, and he completely is in utter shock, and he starts wondering why it was just there, because he had just used some of that money not a few hours ago in order to bribe the merchant in order to pretend to be him, you know. So he had accessed this thing very recently, and that's the point at which Flux said, "Isn't it obvious? You know, your god has abandoned you. He no longer cares for you. You have you have shown the bag. You have talked about him. You have failed." And then Flux kills him. Kills him dead, basically. Really snaps his neck. Sorry, words. Um, at that point in time, uh, yeah, I'm missing one little detail, but it's not really that relevant. Sorry. Earlier, Fiona Sill tried to get a surface scan of his thoughts, and she actually ended up throwing up because it was so vile being attached to a brain like his was. But she did get one thing of relevance, which was if they don't want gold, why are they interested in the bag? Which was where they put two and two together there. Anyways, so then they dug a very deep ditch and buried him there. And it was also at this point that they realized that his belt had been magically enchanted as well. It was actually something of a compass sort of thing. Anybody who has the appropriate attached item could follow their compass basically to wherever this belt was, so he could be tracked. And they realized this is why they'd been tracked so far. In fact, there's a pretty good chance that a search party was basically on their heels, relatively speaking, and only a few minutes away at this point. So they buried him as deep as they dared, covered over the earth, and then said, okay, and then ran. Now, unfortunately, that's actually the end of the session. I say that because it feels like that took me no time at all to describe, even though it was a rather long session. We were playing that for quite a while. The incident with the caravan was incredibly complicated. Lots of stuff going on at the same time. It was really fun. Um, but I guess I'm done, so I will tell you guys what's happening next when I know what's happening next, and I will talk to you guys later.